Hi, this is Kamera. Points in the Bible, day number 116, 2 Kings chapter 15 through chapter 17. I have one huge point, is one big point. Guys, let's remember how we got to this point. The children of Israel, remember, God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, a prosperous land, and He gave it to them. And He told them, if you are obedient to me, if you follow me with your whole heart, if you obey my commands, if you obey my decrees and my regulations, you will be prosperous. I will always cause the rain to come. You will always have green, fertile lands. You will always be prosperous. I will always be with you. If you reject me, then you're going to have a problem. Your enemies are going to do this. I'm going to start from rain. I'm going to cause all this stuff. I'm going to basically take away those things that I've been blessing you with. I'm going to let your enemies oppress you. Before that, if you're obedient, your enemies are not a factor. I mean, even if they tried you, you'll conquer them. Everywhere you go, you're going to be blessed when you obey me. So when they got to the promised land, after Joshua and his generation passed, the children of Israel immediately rejected God. They decided to serve idols. They decided to imitate the worshiping of idols from the other nations, started to intermarry with other nations. Thereby, remember what God said, that if you marry other nations, then they're going to turn your heart away from me. That started to happen. And so God allowed the enemies to oppress them. And so whenever they were oppressed, after a while, they would call out to God, and God would send a deliverer, and that deliverer was a judge. And so that was the cycle with Israel. They would turn back to God because He sent a judge, and then they would do right, and then eventually they would go back to doing those things that were against God, reject God, serve idols. Till an oppressor would come and oppress them, and then they would call out to God, and then He would send a deliverer, which is a judge, to deliver them from the oppressors. That was a cycle. Till eventually, the last judge of Israel was Samuel, and Samuel was a good judge, but they wanted a king. They wanted a king instead of a judge. That right there bothered Samuel, but God told them, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And so God told them what would happen if they got a king, that He would take your daughters and He would work them, and He would oppress them, basically. He would basically be a hard taskmaster to them. What they have would become His, and all this stuff. They still wanted their king. Isn't it something we always think we know best, right? Better than God for our lives. And so they got the king. And so like the third king down, you had Saul, then you had David, who was a king after God's own heart, very faithful. Then you had Solomon. And Solomon, he started to do what he, to lean towards serving other idols. So he started, and then, of course, intermarrying with those people who were not of God, other nations. That's where it all began. Where after Solomon, God divided Israel. You had Israel, who was under a king, and you had Judah, who was under a king. Judah remained under a king. Their king would always be a descendant of David, because David's faithfulness, God promised that there will always be one of his descendants on the throne. But then Israel, they were over Jeroboam. God told him to be obedient as well. But Jeroboam, because he feared the people leaving him, he created idols, and he appointed his own priests. And the children of Israel never strayed from that. They continued to serve the idols that Jeroboam introduced them. That was the children of Israel. Judah, they followed idols, or they followed God. A lot of them followed God, and a lot of them did not. They served idols. They did detestable things as well, but a lot of them did serve God. The children of Judah, they served God, they served idols, they served God, they served idols. You'll see that there were shrines that were still there. There were altars and idols still there, but you had those who still served God. Israel, they always served what Jeroboam introduced to them. They always served idols. Of course, the king served idols, so the people served idols as well. So in the read today, you'll see a quick summary of those kings who served as kings of Israel, and that they did not serve God. They continued to follow what Jeroboam had introduced to them. And you'll see that some of them, a lot of them were assassinated. They were not from one lineage. There were a few kings who had some that were from his lineage, but then, of course, he would be assassinated. He would be conspired against, plotted against by his own people he trusted mostly, right? But then he was assassinated. But you'll see where it gets us to this point. We see where Judah had their kings, and you had some faithful kings, and you had some that were not faithful kings, the ones who turned against God, that rejected God, just like Israel did, following the practice of Israel. So now the last king of Israel. First we have Ahaz, who is king of Judah, but then we have Hoshea. Hoshea is the last king of Israel, right? So Hoshea, he became king in the 12th year that King Ahaziah was king of Judah. He reigned for 9 years, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not to the same extent of the kings of Israel who ruled before him. King Shalimar, remember, God used other nations to punish Israel whenever they stepped out. He had Assyria, he had Aram, and then you'll see in some cases where he had Egypt. So you had King Shalmaneser of Assyria. He attacked King Hoshea, who was king of Israel, forced Hoshea to pay heavy tribute to Assyria. But Hoshea, he stopped. He stopped paying the annual tribute, and he sought and conspired against Assyria. He sought King So of Egypt to help him out of this mess, basically. But Assyria, the king of Shalmaneser, he heard of that treachery, and he captured and he imprisoned Hoshea. Then the king of Assyria, he invaded the entire land of Israel. He besieged Samaria for 3 years. Finally, in the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign, Samaria fell. And the people of Israel, they were exiled to Assyria. Scripture says that all this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God. The Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers. He says to turn from your evil ways. He says, observe my commands and decrees in accordance with the entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey and that I delivered to you through my servants, the prophets. But he said, but they would not listen, and they were stiff-necked as their ancestors, who did not trust in the Lord their God. They rejected his decrees and his covenant that he had made with their ancestors and the statutes he had warned them to keep. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left. And even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God. I love the fact that he says of their God, regardless of who God you serve, what God you serve, you erect or what have you. God is still God over everyone, whether you receive or him or not, whether you serve him or not. He's still God over everyone. He says that Judah, they followed the practices that Israel introduced. Therefore, the Lord rejected all the people of Israel. He afflicted them and gave them into the hands of their plunderers until he thrust them from his presence. The Israelites persisted in all the sins that Jeroboam did and did not turn back to God until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned them through his servants, the prophets. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile into Assyria, and they are still there. And so how about Assyria decided to send some people there to live, and so God wasn't pleased with how they were worshiping idols, and he sent some lions. So they sent a man of God to teach them. But get this, they wouldn't listen, however, but persisted in their former practices. Even while these people were worshiping the Lord, they were still serving their idols. To this day, their children and grandchildren continue to do as their ancestors did. So guys, those are my points. If you have any points you'd like to add, please place them in the comments area. That's points in the Bible. Day number 116, 2 Kings chapter 15 through chapter 17. You have a God-filled, blessed day.